to the fourth episode of Nervous Breakdown Podcast, where we host original content, and this is the Coagulation Cascade.
So first, what is the coagulation cascade?
Well, the Coagulation Cascade is a sequence of events in which blood is clotted using certain clotting factors in the blood. Now, the first thing we have to address are platelets. Go ahead.
What are platelets?
Platelets are in the blood plasma, and they are very important cells that serve to be able to clot blood.
Yeah, they're roughly 2 to 4 millimeters in diameter. They're one of the most abundant cell types of the blood. And today we're going to explore the platelets as being the primary form of hemostasis, and then we're going to look at the coagulation cascade as the secondary form of hemostasis. So I guess we're just going to jump straight in. When you have vessel wall injury, you are exposing the underlying, you expose subendothelium. Here you have things like elastin, catecholamines, other matrix proteins, collagens, things like that, laminins. And what this is causing is then platelet. These factors then the platelets, which have integrins and adhesion molecules, are then able to bind to these subendothelial they're mostly large negatively charged proteins. They're able to bind to these. And the importance of this is if you have vessel wall compromise, you want your platelet plug to form to stop and stop and maintain the vascular integrity. So often here, integrins, you have your adhesion proteins binding here, and then you have the platelet spread. There's a shape change in the platelet where it spreads over the site of injury.
Conformational?
Yeah, conformation of the whole platelet itself. The platelets actually have no nucleus. I think that's important to mention. So they can't transcribe or form any new proteins. So anything they're already coming with has already been preformed. They spread over the site of injury, and then they exocytose the granules within them. So platelets have a lot of different granules, either dense or alpha granules, and they exocytose them. This is ADP and serotonin most often. These are platelet activation signals, and yeah, these are your platelet activation signals. And once your platelets have bound to your subendothelial structures with their integrins, most often GP1B, GP6, GP2B3A. For that, I'm going to talk that a little bit more in a different context. You start releasing ADP, serotonin, and as you can see, we have all these different pathways, all these second messenger systems within the platelet to activate again things like secretion of granules. Um, so this is a big positive feedback loop where you have your ADP signaling pathways through P2Y12 receptors. You have your serotonin signaling pathways, which really activate the platelets. And you have your phospholipid membrane are exposing your phosphatidylserine residues on it, and you're able to form thromboxane with the use of thromboxane synthase, phospholipase A2, and COX-1 enzymes. And here, your thromboxane also going through another signaling mechanism through the thromboxane A2 receptor, for example.
Is the thromboxane a protein?
No, it's formed from the phospholipid membrane.
Okay.
So I would have to say it's a glycoprotein.
Okay. Anything? It's okay. Anything else? Okay.
Um, yeah. So back into it with the platelet process. So G2B3A, as I mentioned, was this integrin. It's this glycoprotein involved in things like adhesion. But what it's also important is specifically binding fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is your big polymer that will form the blood clot. It will create this meshwork. It will polymerize and create this meshwork for platelets to get caught in, to bind into. But it can also do that with red blood cells and other things. And it's really this kind of the sticky long polymer to bind all your stuff and create this aggregate. So once GP binds fibrin, so it can bind. So there's two integrins can go to one fibrin, and then the fibrin can bind to another fibrin, and they create this meshwork where your platelets it will cause cross-linking, and your platelet will aggregate and will form your aggregate. Okay, so I guess what we're going to look at is this is your primary part of hemostasis, so stopping of bleeding. But let's look at some of the drugs that act here because they are of really clinical relevance. At the end, we're going to kind of put the picture together, but I think it's worth mentioning that you have aspirin, your COX-1 inhibitors, to decrease thromboxane A2 synthesis. You have P212 antagonists to block your ADP signaling. Yeah. Also mentions clopidogrel, which is a prodrug. It's interesting because it's your irreversible P2Y12 antagonist, while the other ones are competitive. And then you have your GP2B3A antagonist. You have abciximab, a monoclonal antibody, and eftilagimide. Wait, let me figure out how to say that. Eptifibatide. All right, and these are blocking your integrin binding to fibrinogen, really stopping this aggregation of your platelets. So now that was the primary portion of the part with platelet activation. Then we're going to look at the secondary part with the coagulation cascade.
What do you call it if blood goes to the wrong place? Is it called short circuit?
Actual like short circuit of like the cardiac system, where
Like a blood.
where you have like it will just go in a different path, like path
Yeah.
of least resistance. First, we've talked the primary branch of hemostasis. Now we're going to talk about the second branch, which is coagulation. So when you have vessel injury, what is the first thing that really kicks off this process to kind of stop the bleeding that's ensuing?
Well, the initial response is something known as vasospasm. It's the narrowing of an artery or blood in order to try and reduce blood. There is a kind of short circuit, you could say, where the blood spreads to other areas, and this can cause problems such as building up pressure in tissues and primarily causing blood flow loss. And the narrowing of the blood vessel as well will reduce blood flow and oxygen to tissues. So this is the initial response, and this is followed by the second process, which is the coagulation cascade. Take it away.
So let's just put this all into context for you guys. Pathway of the coagulation cascade. So the coagulation cascade really all comes down to this common pathway at the end, with the final product being your fibrinogen being cleaved by thrombin into fibrin. Actually, I think it's worth mentioning what the coagulation cascade is.
Well, coagulation cascade is a sequence of zymogens, which are precursors that need to be to form active enzymes in the coagulation cascade process.
Okay, so first we have the surface contact with large negatively surfaces. So this will be your collagens, this will be your phospholipids. This will activate 12 to form factor 12, which is Hagen factor, a serine protease. This will then cleave factor 11 to form 11A, and then 9 to form 9A, which then finally factor 8, um, which again, with factor 8 being cleaved to 8A, will form the uh, intrinsic, intrinsic, what even is it? 10A's, 10A's, oh my God. Okay, so we'll form an intrinsic complex. So 9A and your 8A is your intrinsic 10A's complex, which will then cleave factor 10 into 10A. Then again, on the extrinsic side, we have tissue factor, which is when you have trauma or tissue damage, you have tissue factor from tissues, and this will to cleave 7A, and then tissue factor 7A is your again your extra complex, which will then cleave factor 10 to form calcium as well as an of and this will be a bit later, which we'll mention. And then we come on to the common pathway where these two merge, which is from the formation of 10A. This all happens on a phosphatidylserine, which is on the surface of the platelets. So you can see how the coagulation cascade plays with platelet activation, because it literally is happening on its surface. So you need those, you need that phosphatidylserine, that phospholipid on the membrane of the platelets to really boost up and activate the common pathway. Your 10A cleaves prothrombin into thrombin, which is a really important serine for then the cleaving of fibrinogen to fibrin, and then 13A, and then once your fibrin polymerizes, it will form a mesh, which is not enough yet to really form your aggregate and trap platelets and things like that. And then you have 13A, which will then cause cross-linking of the fibrin clot, and is what really forms the stability of it. I think what's also worth mentioning is that thrombin itself will then amplify up this process. You have this positive feedback loop of thrombin to increase the activation of factors 2, 8, 5, 13. And what this is to really boost both the intrinsic and extrinsic pathway in this positive loop, more thrombin, and be able to rebuild up within the vessel wall damage. Okay.
What are these factors from a chemical standpoint?
So these factors have different functions, as we mentioned, they're all zymogens, so they all need to be activated. It's important because the coagulation cascade is not constant. It's important to mention that the coagulation cascade is therefore only really functioning at times of damage. So normally the coagulation cascade would be turned off. Okay, so that's important to mention. These all have different roles. Often they are different types of proteases. You have serine protease such as thrombin, um, serine protease. Um, yeah, so they really have, it's just it's a whole pathway of cleaving things. So often they are these proteases to cleave other zymogens.
And what are these serine proteases?
Um, serine proteases are a type of protease peptides, and they do this with they can do it at different amino acid residues, but it's just mentioned they have a serine in their active site. So
The
serine,
amino acid.
yeah, so serine 57, because of its hydroxy group, is really good at being able to break down peptide bonds,
Hmm.
um, which is important in activating your zymogen in this case. Okay, so we've gone through the pathway of both of the coagulation cascade. I think it's worth also looking into some of the drugs that act here. This is very important mechanism to really target. If you have times of, if you have, for example, hypercoagulable state, you really want to be controlling the amount, or if you have a person with that has um that has predisposition from either a clinical or a genetic standpoint, it's important to kind of control the coagulation so you don't have excessive clotting. And especially in things like atherosclerosis, you don't want this thrombus formation on your plaques. So, okay, let's kickstart it off with I think the primary anticoagulants being your DOACs, your direct acting oral anticoagulants. These are, as mentioned, orally taken, and they directly act on thromboxane, sorry, NA or thrombin. So these are NA or thrombin inhibitors. Rivaroxaban is actually really cool that in its name it has that XA, that 10A. So the rivaroxaban is inhibiting 10A directly, and then the bigatran is inhibiting thrombin. So they are able to, yep, directly bind and inhibit them from then 10A cleaving prothrombin to form thrombin, and then the bigatran is inhibiting thrombin from cleaving fibrinogen. Then your heparins, which are large and charged glycoproteins, glycosaminoglycans, and they are then blocking your activating your antithrombin 3, which is an enzyme that is controlling the activation of the coagulation cascade. So your low molecular weight heparins or your unfractioned heparins, depending on chain length. Um, yeah, they inhibit your antithrombin. They activate your antithrombin 3 to kind of shut down the common pathway. They are also have to be given subcutaneously with IV drip, and then your unfractioned heparins are more unpredictable in how they are acting. Then finally we have warfarin. This is really a very potent anticoagulant, and is even often used as rat poison. Um, so it's a vitamin K antagonist. Um, wait, let me get a mechanism for show you show you. Okay. It basically is an inhibitor of vitamin K epoxide reductase. It blocks at component 1, and you have this pathway of using vitamin K um yeah. So you need vitamin K for the activation of your different clotting factors. So 2, 7, 9, and 10. This post-translational modification through oxidation mediated with vitamin K. And you need to replenish your vitamin K so that you can undertake this gamma carboxylation. And this is done through vitamin K epoxide reductase. However, if you're blocking that with warfarin, and you cannot use your vitamin K for this process. What this means is that you're unable to activate your clotting factors into the proper form so that they can interact with calcium and your phosphatidylserine to undergo the coagulation cascade. So if you're literally down regulating and you're making your coagulation factors or in either inactivated, non-functional, or less effective, you're really slowing down your coagulation cascade. So this is important for warfarin because it has very slow onset and offset in this way, literally stopping at the post-translational, also the level, the Golgi of the of the polypeptide formation, the activity of your coagulants.
We've looked at how form clots using fibrin and mesh aggregates, how blood clots are broken down through a process known as fibrinolysis.
Yeah. So we form the clot. Now we need to break down the clot. So we need to break down fibrin into its breakdown products. This is done through plasmin, and plasmin is formed from plasminogen, and it's done by tissue plasminogen activator, which is released by damaged tissues. So we have drugs that can act here um, to cause thrombus degradation, which is really what you want through your fibrinolytic drugs. These will be your alteplase and streptokinase. Streptokinase is actually from bacteria itself, and the problem with that is, um, as over time you start producing antibodies against it, so it has limited efficacy. Your tranexamic acid can also stimulate your plasmin formation, um, as a as a as a as an opposite to your alpha-amylase and streptokinase. Um, yeah, so plasmin will break down fibrin. It can also inhibit fibrinogen and some of the other clotting factors. And your fibrinolytic drugs are really only used in an acute setting for their clot busting activity and breakdown of thrombi. So let's talk about what is a little bit behind formation of a thrombus.
Okay, so should we look at Virchow's triad?
Yeah.
So Virchow's triad consists of a hypercoagulable state and vessel wall dying, hypercoagulable state, vessel wall dying, and blood stasis.
Yeah. So Vircho's triad is really just showing the three things that kind of are behind a thrombus formation, and what we need to kind of look at when seeing if someone is liable to having a certain type of thrombus. So a hypercoagulable state is either referring to the genetics of it all. So if you have mutations in your different clotting factors, for example, hemophilia A is in clotting factor 8, hemophilia B would be in clotting factor 9. Or if you have some sort of acquired situation, i.e., in pregnancy, coagulation cascade uh, more more effective in some cases. So it would be easier for clot formation and hypercoagulable state, which is kind of driving more clots to form. If you have vessel wall injury in that way, such as things like atherosclerosis and uh, or damage to the endothelium, that's really when your coagulation cascade is going to kick in. So if you have, let's say, a plaque that ruptures and you start exposing all these subendothelial structures, a clot is going to form, which can either lodge further down as some sort of embolism or really occlude that artery or vein with that vessel. And then we have blood stasis, which really is important because if you have slowing of the blood flow, then you start slowing things down. Your coagulation cascade can really kick in. So your platelets will kind of aggregate and they'll start activating each other. And you slow it down, and the factors cannot run over, and they're all there. And without blood flow to take factors away, this flow, constant movement is what really doesn't stop the blood to slow down and these processes to kick in. So the clinical picture that we're going to look at is some of the different type of thrombi and kind of what is behind them. So first we have the difference between red and white thrombi. So the red thrombi are in your venous system and your white thrombi are in your arterial system. And different because it's the different factors or the different components that form these clots. So, in your venous system, if you have a venous thromboembolism, whether it's a pulmonary embolism or deep vein thrombosis, it's really a red clot because you have this blood stasis. Your venous system is low pressure, so you instantly have lower flow, lower pressures. And what this means is if you have states where you have even slower movement, such as you're bedbound, that's a really big problem for deep vein thrombosis. You have real blood stasis of slowing down. Your red blood cells are your red blood cells are basically getting caught in places of flow, turbulent flow, especially behind valves, and they aggregate there, and you start forming your fibrin meshwork, and yeah, so you start forming these big red clots of forming from red blood cells. You also then have white thrombi. This is in your arterial system. Here you have high shear forces, which is liable for stress and vessel damage. And the high pressure system means that your red blood cells don't have this capacity to slow down and form a clot there. So in your fibrin mesh, this will be your platelets that will be primarily mediating the hemostasis. You'll have fibrin mesh with platelets forming um, to stop the bleeding. So your platelets are forming, and this was really all in the context of atherosclerosis. Coagulation cascade, aggregating platelets, they will start this massive positive feedback loop, which will form a clot, and this clot can either completely occlude the vessel or go downstream. So the two different types of clots, whether it's a red or a white thrombus, kind of dictates how you're going to approach this. For your really use your anticoagulants to really break down those clots. And for your white thrombus, use your platelet drugs acting directly on your platelets. So that will be your P2Y12 antagonists, your COX-1 inhibitors, your GP2B3A antagonists to stop the platelet signaling and stop this positive feedback loop of recruiting more platelets to form your clot and exposing that membrane for the coagulation cascade. Now, this would be completely different to thrombus in your venous system, where you don't really have much of these platelets present in the clot, so this will be kind of be futile. And it's really looking at your anticoagulants to stop the coagulation cascade from forming this fibrin meshwork that in times of blood stasis, the red cells could easily get trapped and from the fibrin polymerization could easily cross-link it form this clot because the fibrin is very if you kicks on your coagulation, then when you have low blood flow, they can really easily get trapped and this clot can form.
I think we've covered just about everything on the coagulation cascade. Blood clot formation, fibrinolysis, the breaking down of blood clots, platelet plug formation, platelet plug formation, sorry. Everything needs to be covered. And this was the fourth episode of the Nervous Breakdown podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Make sure you watch our other videos and our other podcasts, of course, exploring the immune system in various parts.
Yeah, we're going to have more videos coming out, especially looking at the cardiovascular system as a whole. So stay tuned for that.
And
Primarily looking at some of the key and crucial drugs that act to alter the system in times of pathology or looking at the pathophysiology mechanisms.
make sure to not have a nervous breakdown.
Podcast.